Thank you, choir. Beautiful song. So the last couple of weeks, we have been exploring Jesus' collection of messages that are known as the Sermon on the Mount. And this is where he's describing what is truly the good life and what it's all about. And honestly, specifically, he's actually talking about what the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, is all about. And the teaching is found in Matthew 5 through 7, and it opens up with a surprising announcement about who this is actually for, that it's not for the people you would expect, not all the super successful and the popular. It is for the lowly. It is for all. And so it opens up with this invitation to realize that I can be a part of this, no matter where I am, what I'm dealing with. It then moves into the main body where Jesus teaches how to be right with God, how to do right with God and with others. And at the end of this teaching, he then calls for a decision, the choice. Okay, so in light of everything he's been teaching, what choice will I make? How will I live my life? One of the ways he describes this choice is by kind of describing it as a path, two different paths that go through two different gates. One is through this really broad gate, and a lot of people will go through it, but it leads to ruin. The other way, the second one, goes through a narrow gate, and few, Jesus says, step through. And yet this path is the one that leads to life. Throughout the Sermon on the Mount, we see that this choice is being held in front of us with each of the things that are being introduced. You think again and again, okay, what is it that I'm leading to in this choice? How will I choose? And we realize that this path is not very easy. And kind of like the narrows in Zion National Park, the path demands a lot at times. Some days we're just walking, some days we are trudging. Feel familiar to you? We learned that there are going to be moments in the Sermon on the Mount where we begin to see that blessing is not just something that's sort of put upon us. The blessing and blessed state is not necessarily what we think it is, where everything's easy and we have everything put together and there's no troubles. Rather, Jesus says that we begin from a place of blessing. The blessing is not something we gain so much as it is that we already have it. That as followers of Jesus, we don't work for blessing, we work from blessing. How does that rearrange your mind and the way that you think about the things that are in front of you? I lead out from blessing. What if every day we woke up and our minds were set on this? Every day we got up and we realized we've already got God's approval. We don't need to wake up and to go to try to prove ourselves to gain the world's approval. What if the moment your eyes opened on a new day, as you stretched, as you breathed, you were overcome in your heart by a realization that God has your heart already in mind, that you are blessed. So from this place of blessing, we are then called by Jesus to then help preserve the goodness of the world, kind of like salt, kind of like a holy seasoning, if you will. And we are to shine brightly as light so that the good that happens can actually be seen. Because how many times have you walked right past something that was good and you don't feel like you need to call it out, right? We forget to see it, to see that it abounds. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus makes it clear that he wasn't trying to replace all of this teaching, the law that was part of the Jewish people's understanding for thousands of years as it was handed down from Moses. He wasn't abolishing what Moses gave, but what he was calling filling it up. Moses' teaching had always been pointing people to follow and love God and to love others. Jesus says he's coming to finish that work, to fulfill what Moses started. And then he begins in about several areas where fulfilling work can be done through what he calls greater righteousness, a greater righteousness. Jesus would say things like, okay, you've heard it said that, but I tell you. You've heard it said that, but I tell you. He goes back and forth, and we begin to realize that Jesus is looking beyond just a task, a thing to do, an action, and he's going deeper to the heart issue. What's going on inside that's motivating or not? It's about relationships with God and with one another, about right relationships, which are deeply impacted, if we're honest, they're deeply impacted by what's going on inside of here. Last week, Pastor Kelly jumped into the action in this section and shared about anger. And if you didn't get a chance to see it, you need to go back and watch it, because you and I, we all deal with anger. And about how Jesus was teaching that we may think that we're okay because, oh, well, I haven't murdered anybody. Oh, no, wait, hang on, time out. Jesus takes it a step deeper, and he says, when we are angry, we begin to harbor something inside of us that allows us to direct our thoughts and reactions in negative ways. We may not be killing a person, but if we do a fine job of killing the peace, killing a friendship, when we harbor hate in our hearts, we are capable of killing love in a marriage. We are capable of killing justice for the poor. We damage the relationships in life, which denies the kingdom of heaven and denies the harmony of righteousness. And so Jesus goes on to teach even further, even deeper into this heart level issue, where he starts to talk about our words and how we use them and how they have impact. He starts to talk about our desires. He talks about how lust is more about consumption and that love is about communion. That marriage is less about a contract and more about a union of care and protection. All this teaching about the wisdom that's from the Torah and the prophets, and it shows how every person is created by God and worthy of love, worthy of our love. And from this, he moves into his next section where he's teaching about religious practices. Oh, watch out, because he's telling you, if you allow all this thing you're doing, if you allow all of that to be about you gaining attention, getting some public praise, then you are missing out on the greater reward that God has in store for you. He gives some examples of how religious devotion can go sideways, and then some suggestions for how to get the kind of your language and the intent back at work. In fact, did you know that this is where the language about the Lord's Prayer comes from? And so every time we're saying the Lord's Prayer, it's a part of Jesus' corrective work to get our hearts into it, not just this thing that we do, to really let it come from here. He then makes sure to point how all of those religious practices, when they're done from the heart, then leads us to this greater reward with God. So as we lead into this next section, I want to ask if you'll pray with me, because gosh, sometimes, when we're learning stuff, we just let it go right over our heads. We act like it's for somebody else. And today I want to tell you that what we're going to talk about, I struggle with, you struggle with, we all do. And we need to get humble, we need to get vulnerable. And so let's pray together this morning. Gracious God, as we lead into this message, I know what's ahead, and for some, they know what's ahead. And it's really easy for us to want to say, hey, can we just skirt around that? Can we not talk about that? But God, I know that right here, right now, that your message that's pouring out of the Sermon on the Mount is all about getting us directed correctly, getting us reset, getting us looking in the right direction, working in the same direction. And so, God, I pray that all the distractions go away. Whatever it is that's been busying our minds, whatever it is that's holding a tired and weary state over us, that you wake us up, you help us to see it, and you just help us to set it aside and to focus in on you, that you might speak to not just our hearts, but to our brains to get us thinking right. Lord, I pray that I get out of the way, that I decrease as you increase. It is your message today. And so speak boldly to us. Your servants are listening. Amen. So a lot of you know that I grew up down the way in Richardson, so not very far. I was kind of in the Dallas area pretty much most of my life. My folks were solid middle class, and so I would tell you that I grew up in pretty honestly, a wonderful upbringing. I can look back and I can see that. I can appreciate. I can look back and see that I had what I needed, and I had love in my house. It was a good place. But I'd have to tell you that as a teenager, with the reptilian brain, sometimes things go off and go haywire, right? So when I was a teenager in my house, I would often hear this word, like, why, what? This word, they would say, no. And I'm like, what? No, why? And they would say, well, we can't afford that, and I kept hearing these. And as a teenager, I'm embarrassed to say, I just locked in so often on what I didn't have rather than appreciating what I did. So when I went off to college, this is almost embarrassing to have to confess it, but when I went off to college, I had one goal. When I went to get an education, to be able to work toward a job, to get to that next thing, I had one goal: to get out and make more money than my dad. That was my one goal. So I went and I got the schooling, I did all the things, and I did it. I got out and I got a job in consulting, and I was making way more money than a kid my age should have been at the time. And honestly, I was making more money proportionately than my father had through most of his career. And yet, I was miserable. I told that story to a friend a couple years ago, and he said, well, you cured that too much money problem by going into ministry, didn't you? And I was like, hey, time out. That's not why I answered the call. But it was interesting how in some of those early years, there were lots of little times where we had very little, and I could reflect back on them positively and appreciate the ways that it helped me to have a moment to focus in on family and the relationships, that I was able to appreciate the little, not waiting for the much. There were some good days in there, even though it was hard. Simplicity wasn't a punishing tool. Well, I will certainly say that, living things perfectly is not what I'm doing now. Like, I don't have this all figured out. I still struggle with this. I still struggle with finding myself listening to Jesus again and again, to be reminded of what's true, to reestablish righteous relationships by vulnerably recognizing my own greed, by vulnerably recognizing my scarcity mindset that I can get locked in on, and my wayward worship that I have. It's like getting a heart with a palpitation, like getting it shocked back into rhythm. So when I finally feel that I'm connecting with Jesus again, I can feel like I'm on rhythm again. But I know that if I fall off, I've got to get back on. So you see, today's message, this passage, is one that I need to hear, and I hope that you realize that you do too. And it's one where Jesus is talking about our stuff. He's talking about our money. And y'all, I don't think pastors talked about stuff and money back then any less uncomfortably than we do today, right? Like, I'm sure that as Jesus is saying this to all these people, they're all squirming in their little dirt seats and kind of going, hey, can you just mind your own business and stop meddling here today? I'm sure that this is not a new thing. But he pressed on because he realized how important this is. So will I. So hang on. Let's get in this together. So today we're going to look into the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6 now, and starting at verse 19. So as we move through, hear the word of God. Stop collecting treasures for your own benefit on earth, where moth and rust eat them and where thieves break in and steal them. Instead, collect treasures for yourselves in heaven, where moth and rust don't eat them and where thieves don't break in and steal them. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. We all get so attached to our stuff, don't we? We get so attached to our stuff, not just like the family heirlooms, but I'm talking about all the stuff, all the tech and the creature comforts and our perfect patio setup and our gadgets and our clothes and our many wonderfully prized possessions that might be needed one day. And so we, hoarding, and so we set them aside, right? We protect them. We have extra space that we fill up with all of our special stuff. And we store it, and we are so focused on keeping it safe that we even invest to make sure that it stays safe, to make sure that our good life somehow comes out because we made it so. But what we want to see is that self-made security is an illusion. Self-made security is an illusion. It turns out our stuff is always vulnerable, that nothing is going to last forever. But this impulse to store up isn't actually a problem. right? Okay, so hear me on this. The impulse to store up isn't the problem. The problem is that we need to realize what it is that we're trying to store. Jesus invites us to shift our attention to accumulating treasure in heaven, to kind of stuff that's so secure that ain't nothing going to touch it. So what in the world might that look like? The stuff that we're supposed to collect in heaven, that we're supposed to store up in heaven. Well, the crazy thing is that if we collect it, the more we collect it, the more we'll experience the kingdom of heaven right here on earth. Okay, so what does that look like, right? We get all these questions. So those experiences, those moments of peace, those moments of feeling fulfilled, the moments of feeling satisfied and quenched, those moments when they happen is because we follow the teachings of Jesus. We do things like offering a kind word to someone. You know what that feels like when you walk away and you realize that they really needed that sense within? That is a treasure. Like when we generously share with someone who is in need, when we offer forgiveness, and not just because somebody absolutely deserved it, but because it needed to happen. You know that feeling on the other side of that? Moments when we show compassion to another. When we store up in heaven, it's sort of the opposite of what we do when we try to store up stuff on earth. Rather than trying to get more stuff to gain more, we have to give up more. In Jesus' name, when we do this, when we serve another, when we give, when we care for others, it's not for our gain, but for the neighbor. Yeah, makes a difference. Heavenly stuff is stored up with generosity. That's hard because we don't always think in terms of generosity. But it's really important to hear that while, yes, Jesus did ask a guy one time to take all of his stuff and sell it and give all that to the poor, he did ask him to do that. But Jesus isn't just about getting rid of our stuff, because there is another time where Jesus said, I want you to be wise. I want you to take your money and use it strategically. So maybe Jesus is more concerned about the deeper issue of what our stuff is doing to our inside heart issues. Maybe it's about what we're becoming when we allow stuff to be the most important. Jesus seems to understand that our habits with our stuff are like a little window to look into our desires in life. So am I focused on myself and those that are closest to me only? Or will I allow God to be able to stretch me, to enlarge my desire to love others and be more generous? Y'all, truth about our character seems to eke out and get revealed in how we handle our stuff. And so catch this. He's inviting us to love God and to love people with our things. Jesus then starts talking about these weird stuff. Like, have you ever had these moments when you're reading scripture and you're like, lock it in, this is good? What? What did he just say? Okay, so we've got this idea about this treasure in heaven. We're going good. And then we get to verse 22, and he says, the eye is the lamp of the body. Therefore, if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how terrible that darkness will be. What? What are you talking about, Jesus? This gets so confusing, and sometimes this happens, but here's the thing. We have to remember that when we are reading Scripture, that it is all contextual. We have to remember that this is not always written in a way that points directly to the things that we know, that we experience exactly as we do today. We have to remember that Scripture is contextual and that there are phrases, there's culture, there's injustices, that it is all being spoken to, that if we're just kind of blind to it, we're going to go, huh? What are you talking about? Like, for example, this one here today. If you didn't know that there was a Semitic phrase, this sort of saying that says a good eye and a bad eye, then this would continue to be really confusing. But here's the thing. When they would say someone has a good eye, what they're saying is that they're being generous. If somebody has a bad eye, then that was sort of this idiom, this metaphor for saying that they're stingy, that they hoard their stuff. And Jesus is saying this is the fastest way to ruin life. Because when the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? Tim Mackey said this. He said, Jesus is describing someone who is so used to living in a scarcity mindset that they truly don't think there's enough to share. They've mistaken darkness for light. And it's like they've lost touch with reality. And reality for Jesus is that God has packed all of creation so full of abundant provision, more than enough for all people. And if we accept that reality, we will find it much easier to live with generosity so that everyone can experience the light of God's life. Jesus finishes with this last verse in verse 24, where he says, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be loyal to the one and have contempt for the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." The word of God for the people of God. You know, it's interesting in that last word, and I'm reading from the Common English Bible this morning. So in that translation, they translated the word to be wealth. In other ones you might look through, you'll see the word riches, or you'll see money, while others will actually hang on to the original word, which was mammon. M-A-M-M-O-N, a weird word. It comes from Aramaic, mammon, which means trustworthy. And so it's kind of like it's describing wealth as something that tempts us to trust in it so deeply, to have our security, that it's got to be in this, that you trust it for your happiness, which we all know that really can't happen in the long run, right? Jesus is the only one who uses this word in the New Testament. Isn't that interesting? It shows up here in Matthew and then another place in the Gospel of Luke. But he's the only one that's used this word mammon in the New Testament. But later writers, non-biblical writers, would try to kind of hijack this word and would write about it being almost like a deity, like this devil, like this sort of tempting evil that gets personified. But I don't think Jesus is personifying this noun any more than you would if you were describing something that you were worshiping as an idol, like a statue. But what it is saying is, in the end, mammon is about the thing that you trust in the most. The thing that you trust in the most. And it's pointing at this idea about money and wealth and about this understanding that this cannot be our gain only. It has to be through God. So what do you trust in the most? Later, the Apostle Paul is writing to young Timothy. He's writing a letter, and in that letter, we see this sort of explanation. He says, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some have wandered away from the faith and have impaled themselves with a lot of pain because they made money their goal. But friends, let's not be naive. Let's not be naive. Mammon has a seductive power in this life. We would lie to ourselves if we didn't say that money certainly has a lot of power in this world, right? I mean, Rich Villodas put it this way. He said, people have sacrificed the well-being of their family for money. Health is compromised in pursuit of money. Integrity is surrendered because of money. Boundaries are crossed because of money. Power is exchanged because of money. Voices are silenced because of money. If we spend the best of our energy and passion to gain wealth, it ends up owning us. When our lives are so absorbed with money and what it can get us, we end up serving it, even to our own demise. Leo Tolstoy, the Russian novelist, captured this in his short story called How Much Land Does a Man Need? In the story, a peasant farmer wants much more than what he has. One day he receives a too good to be true offer for only 1,000 rubles, which is basically 11 American dollars today. He can buy all the land his heart desires. The arrangement is that whatever land he walks around on in a day becomes his if he makes it back to the starting point by sundown. The next day, the man moves quickly to cover as much ground as he can. He is exhausted from walking, but with every step, his territory grows larger. And a few hours later, he realizes he is quite far from the starting point. Knowing that all the land he's traversed is about to be his, He strenuously crosses the finish line right before sun sets. Tragically, a few minutes after arriving at the starting point, he collapses and dies. His servants then dig a grave that's 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. So how much land does a man need? Enough to be buried in. This is not what any of us want. This is not what Jesus wants for any of us. I implore you to think hard this week to recover your soul from that which has been stealing it. What have you allowed to become the most important in your life? What is the thing you trust in most? Shouldn't it be God? Friends, the greatest way to combat mammon is to give it away, to be able to release it, not let it have a control over you. Now, don't get me wrong, generosity is not some kind of magical return on investment strategy with God. It's not like we give so that we can double our income. That's not how this works. When we allow for generosity to take hold in our life, we're not trying to say, okay, we give because God is going to double it. We say we give because God has been gracious to us and calls us to love our neighbor. Generosity doesn't control God's hand. It's the act of opening ours. And so this week, may you experience some of God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. May you experience it because you find yourself recentering on God's initiatives for generosity and care through you. Through you. May it be so in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost for all of us. All God's people said, amen.